We are back on Morning Line, the number 737-7587. If you want to join in the conversation, we're talking guns, gun violence, some of these mass shootings. Of course, we've had more than our share here in Antioch over the past year. Beth Joslin Roth is with us. She's with Safe Tennessee Project. Nice to have you on.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Listen, we've got more calls, folks who waited through the break. Let's go next to Ann. And by the way, the lines are open. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. First, I have a question for you and then a comment for her. My question for you is, there are an awful lot of psychotropic meds that won't show up unless tested for, that are prescribed by physicians, that will cause psychotic breaks if not taken as prescribed. Were there any found in his apartment, and have they checked to see if he was on any?
Yeah.
Before he did this shooting. My question for her is, he was known to have mental illness. There was no expectation for him not to have mental illness in the future. Therefore, there was no expectation for him to ever be given back those guns. So I do not understand why guns would have been given back to anybody. They have been given back to someone who had exhibited mental illness to the extent that that man had shown.
No, you're right. She's talking about the Waffle House case. And well, yeah, the bottom line on all of that is we have not heard from the father, who's probably lawyered up and is waiting to see if he's going to be indicted on federal charges. Who knows? But I'd love to ask him, why did you? And maybe there's a reason he gave him back that maybe I won't agree with, but maybe I'll have a better understanding of it.
Well, as we were discussing earlier, you know, in my experience and having looked at a lot of these cases and talked to mental health judges that oversee these types of cases, there is unfortunately often a level of denial that a lot of these parents have. It's sort of a combination of being in denial that their child has a problem, and also sort of a disconnect about what a firearm in the hands of someone who is exhibiting these behaviors, the danger associated with that. It's sort of this combination of that denial and that sort of disconnect about the potential problem of letting that person have access to guns that is the problem. You know, if it was up to me, what I would like to see is legislation that would make you an accessory to murder or attempted murder if you were supposed to be safeguarding guns and you return them to someone who then used the gun to injure or kill someone else. I mean, in my experience, or at least in my opinion, that person bears some responsibility. It's, you know, it's very unlikely, although possible, but it's certainly less likely that the Waffle House shooting would have happened had that father not returned those firearms to that young man. Now, he might have gone out and gotten guns otherwise, but we know that the guns that he used, the gun that he used, was the one that his father was supposed to be keeping.
Yeah, that was one. I think at least 2 or 3 of the guns they found were the ones. Or was it all of them? And so, no, you're right. It's just tough. I wonder if it's almost a cultural thing within a family maybe that has always had guns, and so people that maybe aren't as familiar with them say, how ridiculous is that? But if they've always been there, if they've always been held responsibly, and you believe your son, really, yeah, he's got troubles, but he would never do something like that, you give it back to him. It's hard to walk in someone else's shoes without really knowing what they're seeing.
Well, and I think what you said is exactly what happens. It's sort of that combination of kind of being in denial, and maybe in your family
they've always been here, it's been okay.
Right.
But that's why I think for that reason, I understand guns have value, and when you take them away, maybe you give them to next of kin or something, but ideally in that situation, they should just be confiscated and taken away, unless, like you say, you sure as heck should not have a handshake agreement that you're going to keep them away. Have a judge say, you hold them. Unless we change the judge's order, you give them to him and he does something, you're going to be an accomplice to murder.
Well, and that's the key is adding that part about making you an accomplice or an accessory, because everything else that you said we already have, like if you're dispossessing your guns, somebody says, okay, yeah, I'll keep them for you. But right now that's all on an honor system, and there's not any punishment for the person who returns the guns.
Right. They need to know that, be careful about doing that.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Let's go to Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, what's on your mind?
Well, I've got a comment about AR-15s and hunting, and then I got a comment about this debate about mental illness and gun ownership and whatnot. The first thing I want to say is, you know, you brought up the boar hunting. I've known people that boar hunted to call the herds because there was an infestation, okay? They used 30-06s. They didn't need an AR-15. They used 30-06s, and if you've ever shot a 30-06, it will take down a wild boar. It can put a hole in something the size of a man's fist at a long range. So I want to drop that and go on to mental health. We keep focusing on mental health, that there were these flags and all this stuff. We all have potential as human beings to have an anger of what they call murderous intensity. So with that being said, there's another angle to this that people don't look at. You talk about mental illness. There are people out there that have guns, that mess with people, manipulate them, get other people to mess with them. I'm not talking about bully per se, just waiting to have a gun shoot out with them or have a reason to shoot them. They prod them. That to me, is that mental illness or is that a societal problem where we've lost our way? So there's another dimension to this than just saying mentally illness. You keep pushing somebody and pushing somebody because in the past we heard stories, well, there were always guys and they lost it. That's why we were raised. Don't mess with somebody. You don't know what they're going through.
Well, that's true. I mean, you know, there's cases where we think some of these shooters were bullying, or getting bullied rather, and whether or not they had a mental illness or finally they just had enough of the bullying. But she's right. I mean, we talk about mental illness, but I suppose all of us can get to the point where we're so angry at someone, maybe we'd like to hurt them. And these days, if you have a gun right nearby, it's maybe easier just to grab it and use it than in the past where maybe you just take a swing at them. I don't know.
I mean, she makes a very good point, and it's, I appreciate her comments. You know, what we know is that the vast majority of people who have a mental illness are never going to hurt anybody else, and they're more likely to be hurt themselves. And what we also know is that a lot of these people, whether they are mass shooters or just your run-of-the-mill everyday shooter, they're not under the care of a mental health practitioner. They don't have a mental health diagnosis. A lot of them, what they have is anger management issues.
Yeah.
They are angry. They are looking for a fight, as she said. There are people that sort of have that attitude about them at all times. That's where a lot of these road rage shootings come from.
Right.
It's really, when you study gun violence the way that I do, what you see is that most shootings are the result of anger, and the result of anger with easy access to a firearm. So a situation where you're outside of a party, outside of a nightclub, you're having a fight with a family member, instead of just yelling or maybe throwing a punch, someone produces a firearm and they pull the trigger, and then you have somebody who is injured or killed and somebody else who's going to go to jail.
All the time.
It does.
Listen, let's take a break on that note. We'll come back. One more segment with you right after this. Stay with us.